it together.
Morning, everyone. Welcome to our General Government Committee meeting. It is Wednesday, September 11th. The time is 8 a.m. We will call to order. First order of business, as always, is roll call. All three council members are present. Councilmember Jen Cathy, Councilmember Leetta Dahlhoff, and myself, Councilmember Michael Althauser. So we will first begin by approval of the meeting minutes from our special meeting from July 17th. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So move.
Second.
So there's a motion by Councilmember Cathy, seconded by Councilmember Dahlhoff. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion passes unanimously. That now brings us to the fun part of our agenda. We have two informational items to discuss this morning, for both dealing with our 2025 comprehensive plan update. First of which is regarding the transportation element. And Erica, I don't know if you or Brad are going to walk us through this one this morning.
Hi there, good morning. Actually, Brad is out, so I do have a guest speaker with me today, Bernie from our Transportation and Engineering Department, to help us get familiar with the transportation element.
Great, wonderful. I think you're muted.
Yeah, I was expecting our
There we go.
Our consultant Farron Pierce to be here to present. Have they not arrived?
Perhaps not yet. We can check. Why don't we check to see if they're in the waiting room?
I don't see anyone in the waiting room.
Okay, let me shoot off an email real quick.
No problem. Well,
Brad's absence is a little unexpected, so unfortunately, so we are kind of going by the seat of our pants right now, but I did meet with the consultant last night. He presented to the Planning Commission, and he had mentioned that he would not be available for this morning. So if needed, I could try to lead the presentation. It's more of an informal informational session, just kind of going over the basics of the element and some key topics. It was a really great session last night, so a lot of good information. So if needed, I can try to walk you guys through that.
Maybe we could go ahead and do that and have an abbreviated briefing, and then if there's a need for supplemental briefing, we can sort of assess as we go along after that. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that's fine with me. And you know, Bernie, if you want to jump in and like make any more comments or help me throughout the process, I would appreciate that. So let me get that information up for you, and then we will get going.
We're glad that all of you are here this morning.
Okay. All right, let's see. Can you see it in presenter mode, or is it still in edit mode?
We can see the slides to the right, so it's not quite in presentation, or to the left, I mean.
Okay, there we go. How about now?
That's perfect.
Awesome. Thank you for your patience this morning, everyone. All right. So, yep, this is an introduction to our transportation plan. The city has hired or contracted with Farron Pierce to help us with this update. We're going to briefly go over why and the need, requirements, the preliminary goals, emerging ideas, our current plan, what we're going to address as part of the new plan, and our next steps moving forward. We are doing the comprehensive plan because we are required under the Growth Management Act. I feel like after all of our presentations, we are familiar with this. And let's see. So one of the goals of the Growth Management Act is transportation, to encourage efficient multimodal transportation systems that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions per capita vehicle miles traveled and are based on regional priorities and coordinated with county and city comprehensive plans. Tumwater's transportation system provides for the safe, efficient, cost-effective movement of people and goods in ways that support adopted land use plans, enhance neighborhood and community livability, support a strong and resilient economy, and minimize environmental impacts. That was the previous 2016 plan. We are working with the consultant to update to priorities now, because with the comprehensive plan, we are looking forward in 20 years. So a big takeaway from this update from last night's presentation is we're going to focus on safety, not just for drivers, but for pedestrians, for that multimodal transportation. We need to start thinking about safety for everyone, and then also accounting for the population growth that we're expected to see. The transportation plan, there are many elements and things we need to take into consideration, such as land use assumptions, which is the growth, not just development, but population. State-owned transportation facility analysis. We need to plan for state-owned transportation facilities in this new update. Facility and service needs. We need to take a look at funding analysis. Intergovernmental coordination efforts. So again, working with Lacey, Olympia, TRPC, and other regional partners. Demand management strategies and active transportation. So the demand for transportation and then also utilizing active transportation, not just driving. As part of the 2023 legislative session, we know that there's been some recent major changes to state law. So House Bill 1181, which is the Climate Response and Comprehensive Planning, House Bill 1110, missing middle housing, and House Bill 1337, accessory dwelling units. We'll kind of go over some of these briefly and how they relate to transportation specifically. House Bill 1181 is an overarching legislative House bill that will affect and be implemented throughout all the elements, especially in missing middle and accessory dwelling units. So this is a map going over our timeline requirements for adopting. We now know that our due date would be December 31st of 2025. This was an interesting slide. So climate related metrics, greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled per capita. Greenhouse gas emissions and per capita vehicle miles traveled, reducing policies required. Greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled reductions within the city jurisdiction must not shift vehicle miles traveled greenhouse gas emissions elsewhere in the state. Focus on our reductions that benefit overburdened communities, and we cannot restrict growth to achieve reduction requirements. The table down below here was really interesting. It was taking a look and analyzing what our most impactful strategies would be for reducing our VMT and GHG. And as you can see, land use had the highest potential impact for reductions. So that would consider our zoning, our development regulations,
So things like density, right? Is that
exactly.
like the more dense you are, the less sprawl there is, then the more potential for reduction of vehicle miles traveled and therefore reduction of GHG?
Exactly, precisely. Yeah. He was saying that the more dense areas, density, the higher the density, the less GHG and VMT there is. So that's definitely going to be a huge strategy for this update. Going down, he did talk a little bit about parking policies, which we've talked about with middle housing and the housing update. But road pricing was a new interesting one that he brought up. It's basically since taxes for our gas are going down because of the demand for gas is going down with the electric vehicles. This is nothing, we're not adopting this and we're not saying this is something we are moving forward with, but there is strategies for taxing people based on how many miles they drive. So it would be taxing them on the impact to the road and to the environment, things like that. I just wanted to mention that because I found that very interesting and I haven't heard of that. So. Talking a little bit about active transportation, the term pedestrian and bicycle facilities will be replaced by active transportation facilities. We are extending or wanting to expand the definition of active transportation to include walking, rolling, scootering, even wheelchair access to be more equitable. And then multimodal planning and level of service. Multimodal level of service in place of vehicular level of service. I don't know, Bernie, if you'd like to step in and talk a little bit more about this, if you're familiar with levels of service and multimodal.
Yeah, I can speak on this a little bit. The Washington State Department of Transportation has recently provided new guidance regarding the stress that is that pedestrians and active transportation users experience as they're navigating the transportation system. Which they're advising to use as the basis for the level of service that we are providing to active transportation users. So that is the model that we're going to be using to plan for active transportation moving forward. And I can speak more on that if you have questions.
Just a quick question. So that sort of, instead of measuring like miles of sidewalk, we're also measuring things like quality and safety of the experience while ambulating on a sidewalk, while riding a bike in
Exactly.
the so okay, that seems like the really smart way to do it, instead of just having a teeny, there's a big difference between a 2-foot sidewalk on a main thoroughfare and something that's grade separated that has a street tree and things like that. So that
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of it has to do with the type of, it's dependent on the type of road. There's different standards for each type of road, but generally the higher usage of motorized road, the higher motorized usage, the more stress caused to pedestrians and cyclists and other active users. So the greater requirement for protections for those users. So if you have a collector, you need more physical separation, like a buffer, a planted buffer between motorized traffic and pedestrian traffic. So that's something that we're going to be including in the transportation element moving forward so that we can plan to plan our active transportation system with that in mind.
Yeah. Does that also take into account like ADA compliance with curb cuts and things like that, to make sure that we're trying to, whenever we upgrade a sidewalk, we upgrade it in accessible ways?
Yes, exactly. And the other thing about multimodal level of service is in this framework is that it's based on not the average of the of each segment and how friendly it is to pedestrians and cyclists. It's based on the weakest part of a given stretch. So if you look at one, you could have actually a good example is 70th Avenue and Little Rock Road. We've been looking at that intersection recently. There's a shared use path that goes along 70th approaching Little Rock Road. But that shared use path ends just short of the connection to the sidewalk at the roundabout, where pedestrians are required to walk along the shoulder, which is a higher level of stress segment of that stretch of road. And so that entire section of road, while it has this excellent like multi-use path, it still would have the lower multimodal level of service because it has that one little section of stress. Because you can get as far as you can, but then if there's that one stressful point, people are going to make that decision based on that. So
Great, thank you. Also, if other council members have questions, feel free to jump in. I can't see folks unless they raise their hands.
I'm raising my hand and I have a question.
Go for it.
Thank you, Michael. Bernie, I love that you brought up that area because I have sent 2 emails regarding that area and the crosswalk. One of our community members saw a woman almost get hit last weekend, right? So cars are speeding and they're not stopping on the crosswalk. And also there have been multiple instances of cars ending up in that like stormwater retention area, but facing the wrong direction for whatever reason, right? So with all this planning, which I'm a big fan of, how do we plan for the future and also address current areas and current needs? How does that all fit in?
yeah, basically the multimodal level of service assessment that is going to be part of this effort is going to help us to do that, to like target the highest priority areas. I think we're going to have probably a large element of that prioritization, I believe, is going to be based on like location, like centrality to the city center, like access to government facilities. Those are the things that we're required to provide access to the public, right? So we have to prioritize it based on those things.
Bernie, in that prioritization, can there also be a discussion about rural areas? Because that is more of a rural area. So I appreciate the urban amenities, right, and services. And I don't want to discount or lose rural areas of Tumwater, which there is a large part that don't have access, right? So that sidewalk you talked about on 70th is great, but my mother in a scooter can't get to the sidewalk because the other side doesn't have a sidewalk. And then there's a little like runoff collection. So she can't even get to that sidewalk.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and those are all things that we have to factor in, absolutely. And the other part of it, I would say, is funding, right? So like we have to make sure that there's funding to support these efforts. So I think that needs to be part of the discussion as we move forward with the development of this element and as we're implementing it in the future, after it's accepted too. Right.
One more thing with that, Bernie, which I love. So the example on 70th and Little Rock, there's a development across the way with Squaxin. Is there an opportunity to have a discussion with them to do maybe a lighted sidewalk while they're developing? Because we know there's going to be a lot more foot traffic. So in that hierarchy of prioritization, could we also acknowledge where things are being developed and maybe there could be a partnership and a way to share costs that way?
Absolutely. I think that absolutely, yeah, we have to make sure that we're working with our developers and making sure that they're yeah, that's all connected together, and we
Thanks, Bernie.
part of what we do is we have we have the traffic team, which we talk about these kinds of issues at, and that involves community development and all the other departments that have a stake in how our transportation network works. So
You have a never-ending list, Bernie.
yes, I do. Absolutely. Just wish I had a magic wand and I could fix all of it,
Well, thank you, Bernie. I am going to continue going through the presentation. Last night, we took almost 2 hours going through just the transportation, so I want to keep us on top of time. Part of House Bill 1181, we are addressing ADA transportation and planning for ADA. We are going to do evaluations of current facilities in relation to ADA accessibility requirements, develop a program and access plans or transition plans to address our deficiencies. This is great conversation that we've had this morning that kind of relates to some of those. State facility funding. Plan must include a discussion of how funds will be raised to address identified needs of the transportation system, including state-owned facilities. We are not required to find the funding for state-owned transportation facilities, like for projects like the I-5, for highways that the state owns, but it does need to be mentioned or addressed in our plan. We have to have a plan, but we're not responsible for finding that funding, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. Targeted outreach. This is another one of those overarching goals throughout the comprehensive plan. Making sure that we speak to the vulnerable populations in our overburdened communities and taking into consideration them when planning. Overburdened communities are a geographic area where vulnerable populations face combined multiple environmental harms and health impacts, including but not limited to highly impacted communities. We're going to start talking about middle housing. I'm sure we're all familiar with what middle housing is by now. It is between a single family residence and multifamily high density apartments. So it's housing that is multifamily on single family residential size lots, essentially. What this missing middle will affect traffic and our transportation element because of population, because of density. How are people going to be moving around? Taking a look at our parking requirements, and if we are allowing more housing and higher densities of buildings and taking away those parking spaces, how can we accommodate for that? Furthermore, taking a look at our transportation impact fees. That's going to play into the housing element and our transportation element. How are we going to collect fees for accessory dwelling units? Our new requirements is to allow a minimum of 2 ADUs per lot. And our requirements for those ADUs, we are changing the state passed laws, so we no longer are going to require owner occupancy on that residential lot. Our parking requirements are going to be changed. And then down here, it again goes over the impact fee. We cannot, impact fees are limited to no more than 50% of those assessed to the principal housing unit. Tumwater is already doing that. We do not charge more than 50% for an accessory dwelling unit. So we are good in that regard. But for housing incentives and affordable housing incentives, that's something we need to consider as well. Draft overall comprehensive plan goals. A lot of these bills that we're going over do have overarching they are overarching into all the other elements, but some key goals that we want to address through this update would be engagement, coordination, vibrancy, equity, resiliency, fiscal stewardship, and environmental. So developing our preliminary transportation goals, city staff met with our consultants project team in June to discuss the goals of the transportation plan. Our current plan has 19 goals. After a lot of discussion, the team ended up with 4 top-level goals. Many of the existing goals will live as policies or implementation actions under the 4-level goals. So we reviewed the 19 goals. We came up with 4 new goals, and whatever goals and policies weren't translated into goals in this update are now going to be policy or action items. So a lot of them potentially could still be in the new plan, but we decided 4 goals is easier to digest, and a lot of the existing goals, policies, and actions could be translated into the new element as action items. So I hope that makes sense. This is just going over some of our existing goals. A lot of them were redundant. I don't want to, well, they could be grouped together. So really we condensed. So we have transportation and land use consistency, multimodal transportation system, barrier-free transportation, system safety and security, system maintenance repair, travel demand management, transportation technologies, freight mobility, streets, roads and bridges, public transportation, bicycling, walking, rail. So on this page of the presentation, we can see that there's a lot of types of transportation where we could probably condense and just address multimodal transportation. So grouping some of these together in the new goals and creating these as policies or action items made more sense to staff. And then going through some more of the existing goals: aviation, public involvement, intergovernmental coordination, environmental and human health, performance measures, and transportation funding.
So Erica, for the goals, where do you think trails would fall on this? Is that pedestrian, or I guess I mean it could be bike depending on what type of trail. Or if there's a big thing called multimodal, maybe trails go on there. But it seems different than streets, roads, and bridges. But I'm just sort of want to make sure that doesn't get lost, because when we do community surveys, trails are always towards the top of that list for what folks want. And we also have several active trail projects that we're currently working on.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not super familiar with the transportation element. I haven't been in many of the conversations, but Bernie, if you'd like to help us out with
Sorry
that
to put you
one.
guys on the spot.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true, and I also think it's complicated because trails seem to mainly be are largely a lot of our trails are parks
Yeah,
projects as well, and so it's kind of a gray area where I guess there's overlap between, you know, where the transportation department and engineering department kind of work with the parks department.
Mhm.
But I agree it should be part of the conversation, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think, yeah, I'm gonna make a note to think about how that to make sure that we're considering that completely in our work with the Fair and Peers.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So here are the 4 draft goals we have for the proposed update. Improve and maintain a complete system. Prioritize safety and quality of life. Invest wisely, and minimize our impacts. I want to take a break here and maybe have a little bit of a discussion. Last night we had really good feedback from our planning commission on some of these. It was mostly about verbiage and words that we're using, such as minimize our impacts. We need to be careful when putting the word ours and taking ownership of that. So we talked about maybe minimize impacts or plan for minimizing impacts. And then also investing wisely. We want to maybe take a look at that verbiage instead of investing wisely and see if there's another term that we can use that's more active, but also there was a comment that investing wisely is it's different to everyone. It means different things to different people. So really great feedback on that. And I see Councilmember Dahlhoff has a question.
Yeah, Eric, along with that, I always like hearing the temperature check like of planning commission, right? So was there any discussion regarding the prioritized safety and quality of life with the word vulnerable users? I'm challenged by that, because it's not just for vulnerable users, like that, our baseline should be all types of users. And so why are we focusing and how do we define vulnerable users?
Right, that's a good point. I'm not, I don't quite recall anything off the top of my head, but we can make a note about that. And
Awesome.
yeah, great feedback.
I think vulnerable user is a term of art that the state has. Doesn't I think there was a vulnerable user law that was passed a couple years ago about pedestrian safety. And so I think the state sort of uses that term. So we probably just copied it from state law, I would assume.
Okay.
Yeah,
I would
believe
like
it
to use a
really-
different word.
I believe it refers to anybody who's not in a vehicle, like a motorized vehicle, mainly. Anybody who's kind of, because a lot of, I think the thinking is that as vehicles have gotten safer for people in the vehicle, they haven't gotten safer for people outside the vehicle.
I like that
so-
clarification, Bernie, and
yeah.
that's clearer than vulnerable.
Yeah, it's that's I think what that I think Michael is correct. It is a term of art that the state is using to
Right.
refer to that group of road users.
Thank you. I do see a question from Councilmember Kathy.
Yes, thank you. What is under minimize our impacts? Is that just not on mine or is that?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Bernie, but are we talking about GHG and VMTs with that? Are we talking environmental, like from that perspective, or is it about growth and expansion?
Yeah, I believe that is getting at the environmental impacts and reducing greenhouse gas emissions primarily, and it is kind of broad. But I guess that's also, these are all broad at this level, right? So kind of get more into the details deeper in.
Yeah, so these are our goals, and then under them we'll have our policies and action items that might get into more detail. Yeah, we're looking at this from like a very broad lens, like very, yeah. So thank you.
Well, transportation discussions, I think minus vigorous environmental impacts or, all of that kind of thing, would be necessary in this plan. I mean, for them to be explicit, but I'm sure as you go along, they'll do that because transportation impacts the environment greatly, whether it has to do with roads or curbs or bridges or all of the things. Anyway, I just didn't know if there was anything under that everyone else could see and I couldn't.
Yeah, this is great feedback for staff as we are going through our goals, changing the verbiage and also defining more of what they mean. We also had comments on the improve and maintain a complete system. So instead of specifically just calling out walking, rolling, biking, accessing, transit, driving, there was also like, well, what about freight? What about planes? Like what about other modes of transportation? So maybe we need to just scale that back and then talk about multimodal. Like let's talk about broad and encompass all of those. So this is really great feedback for us moving forward. And we will be presenting to you guys again. So thank you.
If folks had questions about if wisely, the word wisely was too subjective, maybe an alternative could be invest strategically to support a resilient and maintainable transpo system. So if you're being strategic, then you're putting your dollars where they have the biggest impact and help the most people and plan for the future in the same ways that I think Wisely is trying to also convey.
Yes, thank you. Also, we are going to start talking about or looking into emerging transportation ideas, talking about safety, multimodal considerations, and level of service standards for all modes. So we talked about kind of the stress levels for other transportation users, the walkers, the bikers, the rollers. We're going to look at congestion, state of good repair, and sustainability. What do these things mean when we're looking at transportation and the next 20 years for the city of Tumwater? We have the consultant brought up the safe team system approach. So safety is a huge topic for this update. Safe road users, safe vehicles, safe speeds, safe roads, and post-crash care. Target goal 0, no accidents, even down to the fender bender. No accidents is our goal, because when looking at a scale of safety and pedestrian users, like human life is valuable. And this is from the presentation last night. Our consultant's very passionate about this, and it was really moving. And it was a great discussion around this, but taking into consideration, we do not want accidents to happen. We want to keep people safe, pedestrians safe. There's been a lot of focus on keeping the driver safe with vehicle safety, airbags and all that, but now it's time to also think about other users of transportation as well.
Eric, a quick question with that. In this element, transportation, does fire and police review this because they're on the scene with the impacts, right? Do they ever give feedback of things that they're seeing and ideas?
That is a great point because that is part of post-crash care. How does traffic and accessibility affect responders' time responses? How quickly are they able to get to accidents and to be able to assist? So that is something we are taking into consideration, and I definitely think they should be involved with the conversation if they're not already.
Right. Just one example recently was in front of Tumwater Middle School, right? So you can't turn around. So you're stuck going one way, right? Because of the barriers, the trees. And there was an incident and it backed up and fire couldn't get there because it's backed up and you had nowhere to go. So like those design elements in our transportation, what those roads look like and access. That just made me think of it. I would love to hear fire and police feedback when they get stuck, right? Because of our roads of getting access, and that would impact their time.
Yeah, Bernie, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to say the target 0, where Eric is correct, not to contradict her, that we don't want we do want to eliminate all crashes, but crashes are inevitable to a certain degree. Like we can't prevent them entirely. But the Washington State Department of Transportation's goal of the target 0 vision, they have the whole plan for that, is prioritizing efforts that prevent fatal and serious injury crashes, and a large part of that involves making sure that the vulnerable street users are accounted for in every street. And speaking to Councilmember Dahlhoff's point about fire access and the redundancy, Tumwater has a lot of specific challenges with connectivity. There's a lot of hills, there's a lot of wetlands that make it difficult to create redundancies in all of those roads. Another part of it is making sure that the neighborhoods have multiple accesses, and that's a part of our community development standards is making sure that there's multiple ways in and out of every development to make sure that they're able to get in and out. And so that's, yeah, those are all things that we're trying to consider. Absolutely. So did that answer the question? Okay.
Thank you. So this is going more into that diagram and safety approaches. You know, 0 death, serious injury is unacceptable. Target 0. Humans make mistakes, humans are vulnerable, responsibility is shared, safety is proactive, and redundancy is crucial. Some elements that create a safe system: safe road users, safe vehicles, safe speeds, safe roads, and post-crash care. Multimodal considerations and multimodal level of service. That's talking about auto, pedestrian, bicycle, transit. We touched on this earlier in the presentation. We are now expanding our level of service to think multimodal level of service. With that, the menu is large. We have auto, pedestrian, bicycle, transit, and global. So auto, I think, Bernie, if you could help me, do you know what the VC stands for? I
Yeah,
don't,
it's a volume to capacity. So it's essentially how many cars are trying to get through how much road, essentially.
thank you. So talking about that with intersection delay, corridor travel time for pedestrians, talking about sidewalks, connectivity, and block length. So in cities like Portland, the blocks are smaller, so a person could travel and access more things because the blocks are smaller compared to New York City, where the blocks are large and they have to travel greater distances. That was an example that the consultant gave last night. Bicycle network completeness, connectivity, perception of safety, and stress. We will go over that on one of the next few slides. Transit, so service present, service quality, and corridor amenities. And then thinking globally, mode splits, vehicle miles traveled, personal trips, person delays, and mobility units. I'm not super sure. I don't have a lot more examples of these. We didn't spend a lot of time on this. So if we have any questions. No? Beautiful. This is a diagram of level of traffic stress. So level of traffic stress 1, it's a level that we would like to achieve. It's a level that most children and their parents would find comfortable and safe for riding. So further away from roads, further away from high speed areas, a bigger buffer where people aren't really concerned about an injury or maybe becoming interacting with other modes of transit. Then we have level 2. Interested but concerned. So it's bicycle riders that are representative of a typical mainstream adult and can accept some degree of stress while riding along a roadway, whether that's like crosswalks, intersections. Bernie, if you'd like to speak on this, if you have more
Yeah.
knowledge, I'll let you just take over this one.
Yeah, I'll explain. So basically, each of these levels of traffic stress are it assesses the level of traffic stress that the road the level of traffic stress of a given road. So a level of traffic stress 4 would be comfortable for somebody who is very confident on a bike. They're comfortable riding with traffic. Most users are not in that category, and so we need to make it accessible and appealing to people in the level traffic stress category 1. And that looks different on different streets. So a residential street that has pretty low traffic, that has low speeds, would be much simpler to get to a level of traffic stress 1. That basically already is in that category, depending on the number of vehicles traveling through there. So a neighborhood is most likely already at a level of traffic stress 1. And for a collector or an arterial like Capitol Boulevard, where we just had the recent roundabout project that was completed there at Israel. Is it? Yeah, no, sorry, it's Trosper and Capitol. That intersection was designed to ensure that the cyclists would be that they have a wide bike lane, that there's wide sidewalks for pedestrians to walk on, that it's appealing to those other users. And this includes cyclists, but there's like essentially 2 versions of this. One applies to cyclists and the standards that are required for each of these levels, and a similar one, maybe there's another slide, I don't know, for pedestrians as well.
Bernie, can I ask? Thank you, this helps. There's an example. You had walked with a constituent on Capitol in Cleveland with some bicycle issues, and I just checked in with her, and she hasn't, she said she still sees incidences every day. Where would you consider, like, what level would you consider where you walked with that constituent? Where would that fall?
I can't tell you offhand. There's specific parameters that these standards are based off of, and I don't have that assessment currently,
Okay.
but I can follow up with that if you'd like, and I will. Let me get my pencil. But that's essentially what this we're going to apply this model to every street in the city, and make decisions on what work needs to be done to bring everything to a level of traffic stress 1. That's the intention.
Got it. Thanks, Bernie.
Moving into conversations around congestion, we cannot build our way out of congestion. Studies have shown that whenever you add lanes or widen roads, that traffic will come and it will still have congestion. So adding capacity can decrease safety. How many lanes of road does a pedestrian have to walk across if we widen roads? 12 to 14 more feet of crossing an intersection. How can we operate our system more efficiently? And some capacity improvements are justified. There will be times and situations where adding another lane is justifiable, but we really do want to get away from just adding lanes to try to address traffic. The city of Tumwater has been pretty progressive with adding roundabouts as a way to help with congestion, I believe. So we are taking into consideration how to address congestion other than just adding more lanes, more roads, widening. Going over, more lanes may not be the answer, and taking a look at system expansion for our public transportation, active transportation, other modes of transportation other than personal use vehicles. State of good repair. So we did get a report card from the American Society of Civil Engineers. Overall, for aviation, bridges, dams, drinking water, roads, schools, transit, stormwater, and wastewater, we had an average score of C. It is not the worst, but it is not the best. So this is something we need to take into consideration when planning and through our comprehensive plan and looking at our levels of service. Sustainability, we need to account for climate change, natural disasters, equity, and the economy. Our population is growing. How will the transportation system keep up? What new tools, modes of travel help us manage getting people from place to place, goods from place to place? How can streets and roads support vibrant and local economies? I see you have a question.
No, Eric, I was just doing that so I don't forget. Finish your slide and I'll ask my question.
Yeah, so basically, slides over, so.
Well, all right, thank you. So when we talk about sustainability, where in this is actually like the composition of the materials we're using on our roads, right? As technologies emerge and like the off-gassing and all this stuff, so where is like procurement or materials use for transportation in this?
Are you referring to you're referring to like the building materials of roads and the carbon or environmental impacts
Correct.
of those?
Right.
That's a great question. I don't think that's really been considered in this.
I would love for that discussion about when you're doing these upgrades and forecasting the future, really it's what the material design, right? There are a lot of like, one example is like with healthier furniture, doing carbon neutral, carbon zero furniture. So there's a lot of work DOT in the lab in Tumwater has been doing on materials, compositions, right? We know what happened when they were recycling tires and putting it in playgrounds and soccer fields. No bueno. So I really think like procurement of the materials itself and that sustainability element should be a baseline because that also we can calculate those numbers, right? We're reducing exposures of the workers doing that and also of the public.
I would also say the focus on maintaining our existing roads and not focusing on adding capacity is probably going to have a large impact on the carbon impacts of that construction as well.
For sure. I would love that if there could be an element to not forget what we're using to do our transportation as well. Thanks, Bernie.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great comment. Question. Our current plan, after reviewing, it's a firm foundation for our update. The pandemic has changed how and where we work and travel. The changes in transportation priorities at the state and local level since 2016 have grown. So there's a lot of work that we need to do to address, but the current plan is a good baseline, and we are working off of that. And in the new plan, we're going to incorporate the changes we've discussed, as well as the input from the community, our planning commission, stakeholders, and you. So thank you for all the feedback that we've received. It's been really great. Next steps. We are going to continue working with the consultant, working on our draft goals and policies, doing studies. I know that we are still waiting for land capacity analysis and our total, our final housing allocations from TRPC because we know now that population and growth does affect transportation. And so if we need to plan for X amount of houses and X amount of people, that will impact our transportation elements. So we still have some moving pieces, waiting to get some final reports, but really we're going to start working on the details, the hows for our goals, our new 4 established goals, working on updating some of that language. So we will come back and present more to you guys when we have it done. If you have any questions, send them to Brad or the comp plan email, and we will relate them back to our consultants and our other staff. So that concludes the transportation element update. I see that it's 8:53. We still have the, let me stop sharing screen. The format of the comprehensive plan.
Yeah. So do folks have any other final questions? We're a little tight for time. Okay. So Erica, for the next one, for the document format, is that one that you were going to handle today in Brad's absence? Okay. Because if we needed to push, we could, this is not super time sensitive, it's informational only, but if you're prepared to walk us through that one, that would be great.
Yep, I just have to share my screen. I will give you a brief overview. We are going to be discussing how the plan is actually laid out. So let me get that one up for you guys.
Sorry if folks can hear my dog whining in the background. She's bored and has put a total of 4 tennis balls at my feet.
I thought that was just your stomach.
All right, hopefully you guys can see a diagram here. Perfect. Staff, we wanted to change the layout to make it more user-friendly and more accessible. And we really wanted to separate goals and policies from technical information. We also, there is a need to simplify, if possible, the plan. So we have a proposed plan introduction. So this would be an overview of the plan, the background, Growth Management Act, overarching goals. Then we'll have a proposed user guide and a goal and policy guide. The next step would be to have the individual elements, and the elements are broken up into 2 pieces. For example, we had the land use element. We would have a section for goals, policies, and implementation actions. And then we would have a document for our technical background, the need, the maps, more technical information on that. And then the sub-area plans, so maps and appendices that we would typically see throughout the plan relating to land use. That was a kind of complicated one to simplify, but so for housing, we would have goals, policies, and implementation actions, and then we would have our technical background document. That was just our proposed idea. We had an example in the packet for the utility element. I feel like what we want to do is within that technical background information is try to reduce how much technical information we are sharing as far as like Growth Management Act and overarching goals. We really want to address that through either the user guide, plan introduction, or the goal and policy guide. And then also throughout the plan, we need to consider using more graphics, more pictures, more tables, because as we know, our elements are quite lengthy. There's a lot of words, a lot of technical information. How can we simplify and make it easier for not just staff, but for the community to comprehend?
One thing, Eric, with that, which I love, is it normal procedure for staff to test for accessibility, right? So do the accessibility reader and also using plain talk, right? That's been coming back to state agencies. That was a while ago. Now it's coming back. So we're mandated now at my state agency to do plain talk again, and everything is accessible. So the descriptors of the tables, because I know with some reading, my mother uses that, and it's hard to do the tables and the visual graphics.
Yeah,
So
sorry for interrupting you.
No, you're good.
Prior to us uploading documents, we should be doing accessibility checks. We have had training through our communications department. Yes, we should be. It is a state it's a requirement that we go through the accessibility. So yes, that is something we are
Awesome.
doing. Yeah. And
Perfect.
another thing that we have to take into consideration is how can we upload this document online? So how is this large document going to be accessible online and meet accessibility requirements that way is too? Not a lot of people are going to be getting physical copies of this.
Right. Eric, in that testing, are you able to test it for translation and also for audible technologies and software? Those are the 2 things, because not everyone's English is not necessarily their first language or their strongest language. So that way, if there's testing, is it for translation and playback?
Definitely. I will have to check with our communications department and work with staff that do help us manage our our website. These are, yes, things that we should be considering, especially looking at equity and how much legislation has passed as far as accessibility and communication and public outreach. So thank you. We will
Awesome,
make a note
Erica.
of that. Yeah, look into
Okay.
that. So my ask with this is going forward, when we present our goals and policies and we start to get into the final drafts of the technical information, how can we make it more digestible? Does it make sense to the public? This is why public engagement is so crucial for the update. Like, is it comprehensive? Can they comprehend that information? Does it make sense to them? Are we writing our plans in a way that they can understand and know like the hows and whys we're doing this? So hopefully this structure helps with navigating our comprehensive plan, and then we will work on the actual content as well. Also, just the formatting of the documents matter. So going through the documents in the staff report, the utilities element, the way it's laid out, the way the columns are arranged, is it readable? Can you go through the different sections and does it flow?
One thing that jumped out to me was when I was reading through it, was when I got to the introduction, I was sort of expecting that to be like a page about why we do a comp plan. And this feels like an introduction / executive summary. Because there's so much content in there. Like usually I skip the introduction and then I look for like an executive summary of something if I'm an unfamiliar reader with the document. So maybe there's a way other than the word introduction to sort of convey that this actually has like, if you're only going to read a few pages and trying to get a gist of something, that this is sort of where the meat is in those regards. But otherwise, I do really think it's really smart for us to have sort of this like residence guide to how to actually interact with the document. That's a question that I get a lot from constituents about like, what is the complex, if I want to like see what the city actually envisions the future to look like, how do I navigate this enormous document that contains all this really important information? So I really love that we are including a user guide and the ability to make it more accessible for people who don't do this on the day-to-day, but really want to see, you know, what the vision is for the future. So I think it's really great that we're doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Great feedback. Moving forward, we will keep that in mind. This is just a draft, and we translated a lot of the existing plan into the examples that were in the packet. So staff are aware we do need to make some changes. We probably will have to reduce and condense and incorporate plain talk throughout the element. And what is pertinent, what applies to the community, to staff, what do we really need to know? Background information is great, but what is going to help us moving forward for everyone? So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing if there's no more questions. Perfect.
Any other last minute thoughts or questions from council members on sort of the format we're looking at, feedback after having read it through and reviewed it? Okay, well, I think that's it. Thank you, Erica, for the briefing this morning.
Yeah.
Thank you also, Bernie, for helping pitch it. I think that, you know, we got all the information we needed. We really appreciate your flexibility and availability for helping us walk through this and digest this morning. Great. Well, with that, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda, and we are adjourned. Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate it. See you next time.